I'm telling you now.
Where do you get from?
Hi folks, you're with Tassus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. I'd like to take you back to 1957 in the US state of Arkansas, and in the capital of that state, Little Rock. And this was considered to be, certainly by the black activists, to be a seminal moment, as they would allege, at least, in asserting black rights. Now, I suppose some backdrop issues here, and the dialogue and the narrative around this time is almost completely dominated by black activist opinions and views. So we need to keep that in some sort of perspective. But the arguments, as I understand it, this is like before I was born, for goodness sakes. But the issues, as they claim, the black activists claim, is that America, the United States, was an incredibly rich country after World War II, and the standard of living was very high. This is when the suburban block of land and the motor vehicle, all the household appliances such as refrigerators, washing machines, and so on were within reach of the middle class. That somebody who worked at a factory, the purchasing power of the paycheck was so huge that they could afford to have a dependent wife and 2.4 children, and all from the wage of a factory worker. So this sort of indicated just the standard of living, how high it was in the United States. So the black claim was, well, that's how the whites were living, but we blacks weren't sharing equally in that bounty, and that therefore is a moral wrong. The outcomes were not equal. It is therefore a moral wrong. Now, you have to remember that the entire black activist movement at the time was shot through with Marxist agitators, much of it funded by the communist Soviet Union, and so their perspective on how society should be run and how wealth should be distributed was very much along this Marxist communist equal outcomes type paradigm. So they were claiming that, well, look at all this bounty, look at all this wealth, these riches that are abounding, but we're not getting the same outcome as the better off white people. Now, there were still very poor white people in the United States, people living, in the Ozark Mountains and the Appalachians, people living in far out rural Texas that had no running water and had no electricity. But the activists chose to say, well, no, we don't want to compare ourselves to them. We want to compare ourselves to the better off white people and say, well, we're not as well off as the better off white people. Therefore, we are being discriminated against. Therefore, there is racial prejudice. Therefore, there's white supremacy. Therefore, there is Hitler. And this was the logic that they applied. Now, that's one vein. On the other side of it, they were saying, well, the key to this is getting a good education. So the black community, is disadvantaged in education because our schools aren't as well resourced as the white schools. Now, there's a couple of backstories to this as well. The black kids were dropping out of school much earlier, were much less interested in an education, and so resources for the black communities were squandered because they wouldn't force the black kids to go to school. Also, black kids being violent, as it is today, by the way, black kids being violent and misbehaving meant that the white teachers, unless they were themselves, screaming Marxist, the white teachers wouldn't go near the black schools. So only black teachers would teach at the black schools. And even a lot of the black teachers would still prefer to teach in white schools. So there's a lot of behavioral problems, a lot of attendance problems, a lot of violence problems, all these sort of things in the black-only schools. And obviously, this was something that the white community didn't want in their schools. So there was that. Now, the black activists, all funded by primarily Jewish lawyers and Jewish activists, they filed a court case. They took it to the Supreme Court. They lost in the lower courts. Took it to the Supreme Court about segregation in education that existed at the time. Again, we're talking 1950s here. Now, I think it existed for good reasons. Whether they're morally, where reasons are cast in great moral beauty, that's another matter. But for hard practical reasons, then the behaviour of the black community was vastly different from that of the white community, and that's why the discrimination is there. It wasn't that people just hated black. You could find people that hated other people based on their race. You could find that. You could find that on both sides. Now, the argument is, well, the people who hate and have social power are the evil ones. When the people who hate and have less social power, they're not evil. That's bullshit. Bullshit. They're both as evil as others. Now, my take on this, by the way, is that every citizen, be they black or anyone else, every citizen has the right to equality under the law, and has a right to full due legal process in any court of law. That is absolutely. And if we learned anything about the mistakes and failures of the past, for fuck's sake, that has to be one of the biggest lessons to be learned. But we see today that it hasn't been learned. But anyway, that's that. So that sort of equality should have existed, but didn't at the time. Well, no, I shouldn't say it didn't. It didn't universally exist. It existed in patches and places rather than universally. Now, so the black activists, again, all funded and Jewish lawyers and all that sort of stuff, took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that there could be or should be no legally sanctioned segregation of education. So, okay, where do we go from here? Now, this wasn't necessarily an issue in, say, somewhere like, I don't know, New York or Massachusetts or somewhere like that in the very left-leaning liberal Northeast, but it was an issue in the South. So the activists, the act again, with a lot of Russian Soviet agitators and Jewish lawyers supporting them, decided that they would open up the racial fault lines, if you like, of conflict in Little Rock, Arkansas. This would be where they do it. So they picked what were known as the Little Rock Nine. So there were 9 black students. I think there were 5 women and 4 young men. These were like high school students, and I think they were in their final year of high school from memory. And they wanted those 9 students to enroll in the school and be this is an all-white school, by the way, not a single black student in there. Now, I think they were stupid to do this. I think they should have worked to create a new school where both black and white or anybody students could go based purely on merit. But they didn't want that. They wanted the big racial confrontation. The black activists, they wanted the big shootout in the main street, and they got it. So they tried to enroll the students, and there was quibbling about the enrolling process and the legitimacy of it. There were various other things that were there. Some of them technical issues and some practical issues. And the black students, I don't know. I just listening to interviews of the students from the day and even later on in subsequent years, because they were hailed as great civil rights heroes and that sort of people of outstanding courage, when really they were just kids that were dragooned and hustled into doing this at the behest of the big race hustler and grifters that were operating behind the scenes. So listening to these the ones that I listened to the interview, they definitely weren't picked, as far as I can tell anyway, they weren't picked for great academic credentials. Now, if they picked the exceptionally bright black kids and done that would have been one thing. And maybe they thought they were. Maybe these were the brightest black kids they could lay their hands on. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it to me, but hey. So they eventually these kids were enrolled. Now there was some points of high drama. The governor of the state called out the National Guard to stop the police and the National Guard to stop the black students from attending the school. Now, there were legal arguments back and forth as to, the enrolment processes, that sort of thing. The black activists are saying, well, if we can't go into the school, it's because of anti-black racism. That's it. End of story. Nothing to talk about. The people on the white side and mobs gathered, to carry on and shout slurs at each other and that sort of thing. But the white people were saying that the logistics of this and the practicalities just aren't there. Why should people who behave so very differently from white people be coming into a 100% white school? This is clearly a race grift, which it was, by the way. So anyway, the federal government, because the Supreme Court had ruled that educational segregation was not legal. Because of that, the federal government, with President Eisenhower at the time, called out federal troops to escort the children into the school. Now, this was sort of high drama, as you can imagine, around the world. This was international headline stuff. So the race grifters and hustlers got what they wanted. And they got the sort of reaction that made the white people look evil, bad, Hitler, Nazi, fascist, racist, all the stuff. But none of the story about the race grifting and hustling in the background and all the activism that went into this on the black side, none of that was really, like if you look at the newsreels today, you can't find almost any mention of that, or not that I could find at least. So the black kids went there, and I think some, if not all of them, graduated from high school. Again, I think this was the final year of high school. But the activists had their footage and had their confrontation, had their drama and that sort of thing. Now, the other thing the black sort of diaspora talks about is the Jim Crow laws, which again, if it infringes upon people's right to be equal under the law and to be to be entitled to due legal process in the court, anything that infringes on that is not acceptable under any circumstances. And to the extent that was ever an issue, then my view is that any government of any persuasion should and must and be obligated to treat all citizens to be equal under the law. And should that fail, again, under any circumstance, then it's simply not acceptable under, forgetting the moral issue, by the way. This is a sheer, that you run a society by having equality under the law. And we've lost that today. A conservative voice on social media is fascist Nazi Hitler, whereas a screaming leftist globalist voice saying kill all white people is considered to be virtuous and beautiful and still allowed to go on social media. So we don't have equality under the law today. And again, I grieve because of the lessons not learned by the mistakes of the past. And again, if that's one lesson we should be, that's it. Equality under the law, equal entitlement to due legal process, which, by the way, is a protection for all of us under all circumstances, whether it be tyrannical government, the goon squad down on the corner, or the heavies out the back. We have that equality under the law, and again, the due legal process. Then we're all protected. If we allow that to be chipped away at or undermined or in any way compromised, then we are all in danger. And I wish more people would see that. Now, looking back at it now, I think it was a stage-managed piece of racial grift hustle theatre, and shouldn't have been given the credence it is, nor should it be a seminal or be seen as a seminal moment. Just finishing off on the Jim Crow laws, by the way, there are the Jim Crow laws are looked at in the same way today as if somebody is asked, voters have to, in the United States, I'm talking about here, voters have to produce ID before they can vote, for example, and proof of citizenship, these sorts of things. So that's instantly jumped on by the activists, saying, well, that's anti-black, it's racist, it's Jim Crow, it's Hitler, it's fascist, it's Nazi, it's white supremacist, it's straight away they jump all over for something simple as producing ID, for fuck's sake. And that's the same way that they look at most of the Jim Crow things. Now, some of that Jim Crow stuff, again, didn't allow for equality under the law. So hey, that is a serious problem. But a lot of this stuff they rave about as being Jim Crow, and they say, what's this? And voter suppression, black people couldn't vote. A lot of that is really made up. For example, the voter registration forms that had to be filled out to register as a voter in many states, not just a state like Arkansas, but many states, that required somebody to be able to read and write and be literate and that sort of thing. And now a lot of blacks were minimally literate, again, because they didn't attend school or they goofed off from school, they didn't give a shit about school or whatever the case may be. It wasn't because they weren't schools, they were. If they were illiterate and couldn't read and write, then they couldn't register, and so it couldn't register to vote, that is. And so they were denied voting rights because of their lack of literacy. But it was a requirement to register to vote. It wasn't blacks that were being singled out. It just happened there were more black people who were illiterate or less literate than the white people. So it disproportionately affected black voters. Or adults who are eligible to potentially eligible to vote if they could register. Now, I don't have a problem with that. To me, there should have been compulsory. So if you want to vote, there's a compulsory literacy class that you have to attend. And when you reach that level of literacy, next time you can vote. I mean, there should be no restriction to voting, and the means to be able to acquire the capacity to register, literacy in this case, in my view, should have been provided by the state. So you technically, as a citizen, you're eligible to vote, but you have to be able to fill out this form. So you have to be illiterate. Now, on the flip side of this, the white people argue, well, if the black people are illiterate, or anyone trying to register, there were some white people illiterate as well who didn't register or couldn't register. So if anyone's illiterate, then they're not able to understand. Well, you can't read the newspapers, obviously. TV was just coming in around that time. You're not able to understand the issues. You're not able to read. You're not able to look at government policy documents. You're not able to make any judgment as to who to vote for and why. And therefore, if you're illiterate, that should, in essence or in effect, disqualify you from voting. I see the point there, but again, I don't necessarily agree with it. And the means now, if the black person refused to attend the literacy classes, that sort of thing, that's another matter. And I think that should be, if you don't want to be a citizen, if you don't want to participate, and you don't want to be a citizen, then you don't also get the right to vote. That's my take on that. But again, activists would say, well, that disproportionately affects black people or people that don't speak English. Well, okay, sure, but it still comes back as a citizen, and to participate as a citizen, you must be able to speak the language, and that, to me, it comes back to that. The responsibility of the citizen to participate. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.